Hi, this is Dan Mahoney. Welcome to the Lilac City Podcast.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to have you. Maybe tell us a little bit about your leadership background personally.
You bet, James. It began as a cadet at West Point, the U.S. Military Academy. And the things that I took away from there about leadership were the importance of authenticity, applying a common set of leadership principles to your own personality and not trying to change who you are or change your personality, because that's phony.
Right.
And people pick up on that right away. Integrity was an important principle that was established for me in that environment at West Point. And the importance of leadership was emphasized, because in a military context, leadership can make the difference between life and death. And so we took it very seriously. And those were the main takeaways from that part of my leadership journey. But then the journey continued as a junior officer in the Army. And what I learned in that environment that has been extremely helpful to me throughout my career, and I think is helpful to anybody who understands this principle, is the fact that you're depending upon others for your success. And as a 22 or 23-year-old lieutenant, it's impossible that you would know as much about your job or your unit as non-commissioned officers who had been in the unit or in the Army for 20 or 30 years. And the fact that you are technically, legally outranking them doesn't mean that you know more than they do. And so it was a great environment in which to learn how to rely on other people, how to delegate to other people, and most importantly, how to give them credit for what they contributed and not try to take credit for anybody else's work.
Right.
Because that encouraged them to do their best. Giving them recognition for what they did and giving them support and respect for what they knew was the best way to motivate them, and not using your positional power over them. And so that was my takeaway from my experience as a junior officer in the Army. And then after about 5 years of that, I moved into the semiconductor industry.
Really?
And that's where I spent the bulk of my remaining career. And what I learned in that environment was that the first two sets of principles that I described were still valid. They still applied.
Right.
But I gained a new appreciation for the importance of setting an appropriate vision and mission for the organization. In the military, that was all given to you.
Oh, sure.
In the business world, it's the job of leaders to establish that. And so I did that, and I found that measurable goals aligned with the mission of the organization and a good understanding of that mission was the best way to build a team and to get high performance out of that team.
Right. So an incredible journey. I think you maybe have a tendency to downplay a little bit just because you're a humble leader, but tell us what types of roles that you played within the semiconductor industry.
Well, I started out in sales and marketing positions and moved up in the organization through operations and ultimately executive management positions. And for the last 10 years of my career, I was the CEO of Renesas Electronics America, which is the North American subsidiary of Renesas Electronics in Japan. And that is the combined semiconductor business of Hitachi, Mitsubishi, and NEC Electronics. And it was a large business with a lot of people.
Wow, that is impressive. And it's great to hear all of the leadership experience that you picked up along the way and at the various stops through the military and then through private enterprise. And what are you doing today? You're semi-retired, but then came back, and you're involved in a lot of leadership initiatives and groups around town here in Spokane.
That's right. I've been very fortunate since I moved up here about 3.5 years ago to find a number of different areas to engage and to continue to learn, but also to contribute to organizations. So I'm an adjunct professor in Whitworth's MBA program, which I love. I do some executive coaching and organizational consulting. I'm on Gonzaga's Leadership School Board of Advisors. In fact, I'm the chairman of that board.
Okay.
And I'm also on Whitworth University's Business Advisory Board. And in addition, I'm on the board of directors of an LED lighting company down in California.
Okay, very nice. I'm super excited about today's show. I think that your perspective and working outside of the area and then coming in and certainly all of the various roles that you've played throughout your career, it's going to bring an awesome perspective for all of us here in the Spokane area. So thanks for coming on, and I think we're going to hear some things that we haven't heard before, and you might downplay that, but
we'll see.
I think here we go. So this is going to be exciting. What as a leader in private enterprise, what was kind of the most exciting moment that you had?
The most exciting moments that I had in my business career all centered around successes with customers. Business doesn't operate in a vacuum.
Mm-hmm.
And if what the business is doing doesn't satisfy customers, it will not survive. And so when we worked long and hard to design one of our semiconductor devices into a customer's product, like the Apple iPod
Sure.
or the Apple iPhone, for example, where my company provided the display driver chips, that was a lot of work. And to get a success like that for the whole team, where everybody felt like they contributed, that was by far the highlight of my career in the business world. And other examples like that of designing devices into Cisco or IBM or General Motors, those types of customers, made me feel like we were accomplishing our mission. But more importantly, It made the rest of the team feel that way because everybody knew that they had a role to play.
Definitely. I like what you said early on, how you learn to give people credit. And
Yes.
really, I mean, the things that your quote unquote people are doing bring you recognition naturally. So it's great to
That's an excellent point, James. You don't have to seek credit. If you're the leader of an organization and the organization is successful because everybody else is motivated and they're getting credit, you will naturally get credit.
I like it. What was the most terrifying moment as a leader?
Well, the most terrifying moment was the management of the aftermath of the 2011 Great Japan earthquake, which destroyed one of our major factories.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll get to that in the ethics portion.
Yeah, we'll talk about an actual example of something that happened there. So I'm excited to hear that.
Yeah.
And then how about the most rewarding moment, big or small?
I think the most rewarding moment for me, or series of moments, was where we changed direction of the company. We exited certain businesses or we entered new businesses. And in 2 cases, I led the merger of the organization, Hitachi and Mitsubishi Semiconductor combining.
Okay.
And then that entity combining with NEC Electronics in North America.
Oh, right.
And to manage change of that magnitude and that scope and see everybody align around a new set of strategies and priorities and objectives was by far the most satisfying part of my career because it showed me repeatedly that most people, almost all people, want to do a good job. And if they're given the guidance and the direction and the tools that they need, they will. It reminded me of an expression that I heard that has been attributed to Winston Churchill. I don't know if he really said this.
Sure.
But supposedly he was asked after World War II, which country had the best soldiers? And reportedly he responded, there are no bad soldiers, only bad generals.
I like that. So tell me, how many people were involved in these mergers?
At the peak, the organization that I led had over 1,500 employees.
Wow. And so that's tremendous to be able to bring them all together and
yes,
operating under one mission. That's incredible.
It is, especially when they came from different cultures and different backgrounds. But again, given a clear mission and set of objectives and a transparent explanation for why those were important, everybody wanted to do their best.
Right. Wow. So tell me, Dan, as a CEO of a company, when challenges come up, challenges come up all the time, what type of process or processes that you work through to resolve various challenges that came up?
Sure. Good question. First of all, I look at the challenge or the problem in the context of the organization's vision and mission.
Okay.
and values, frankly. And I make sure that we don't lose sight of those overarching principles when solving technical problems, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
I then collaborated with my staff. Many people on my staff I considered to be smarter than I was. Many people had expertise in areas that I lacked, and I needed a collaborative team effort to solve complex problems. And so I relied on a transparent, collaborative process with my staff. And I found ways of communicating with the entire organization, not just my staff, what was going on and what their role to play was and what the implications were for everybody, so that people could see that we were all in the same boat,
Right.
and that I wasn't driving a personal agenda.
Sure. So I like how you mentioned values of the company, because I think it's the small decisions that stray from the values of a company that eventually you end up, 90 degrees from where
Right.
you were trying to go. So
Exactly right.
that's
Values
pretty key.
inform how people operate and the kind of decisions that they make in the absence of clear-cut guidelines and direction. Values inform their behavior, and that's why they're so important.
Definitely. So when with all the demands that are placed on a CEO, especially in today's world, how do you stay focused and organized on really, I guess, maybe the top key things that need to be done for the organization? How do you keep those focused?
Right. Well, to me, the best way to stay focused and healthy at work is to have a balanced life. And there was a quote that Andy Grove, a very famous longtime CEO of Intel Corporation.
Oh, sure.
I don't know that it was a quote, but it was more of a principle of his, that people in his organization who were afraid to take their vacation
Oh, yeah.
weren't very good employees. They were lacking confidence or a sense of security somehow in themselves.
Sure.
Nobody is that important that they can't take a break and separate themselves from their job from time to time. And in my own case, I tried to keep balance in my life. I tried to maintain a deliberate focus on nurturing relationships with family and friends, maintaining friendships outside of the workplace. And even at the busiest point in my career, I maintained a commitment to prison ministry because it was totally different than work. It was aligned with my own faith and my own values. And it gave me exposure to people who would have loved to have my problems. It helped me
definitely.
put my own situation and my own challenges in perspective.
Into perspective,
And I saw people behind bars who were extremely happy. And I thought to myself, happiness is something that comes from within, not something that is given to you from outside.
Right. That's the intrinsic versus extrinsic, I think, and different people have a tendency to view that differently, but it's, you're right. It comes from within.
I agree.
So we talked a little bit about challenges and decision making, and I was reading an article from Jeff Bezos, the CEO of Amazon, and he talked about type 1 decisions versus type 2 decisions, and type 1 versus type 2, those being mission critical decisions or I guess less critical decisions, and how he handles those. So what are your thoughts on that?
I think his insight is very powerful. He talked about the difference between reversible decisions and irreversible decisions. And we talk about principles like this in one of the leadership classes that I teach at Whitworth, where if you make a decision that you can afford to be wrong on and you can learn from and you can build on that experience, then you can afford to take more risk than if it's a company-killing decision or a potentially company-killing decision. And Jeff's point about putting a lot more time and effort into the decisions that are irreversible than you do into the decisions that are easily reversible makes a lot of sense.
It does. So I guess that comes down to maybe trusting the organization underneath you to make a lot of the decisions that are reversible, and trusting your talented people to do so.
Exactly, and making sure again that all of that is done within the context of the mission, the vision, and the values of the organization. To me, those were very real elements of leadership They weren't just written on a piece of paper and filed away somewhere.
You kept those close at hand with every...
I did, and I tried to reinforce them to the organization.
Right. So we have this exciting case study coming up on ethics that you're going to share with us, Dan, and I'm very intrigued to get into that. I want to lead in with a few questions just in general on ethics and what types of ethical decisions, kind of beyond the case study, were you faced with as a leader, and was there ever pressure to get to go on the other side of the ethical boundary, so to speak?
I could give many examples over a 30-plus year career, but I'll give one that I think is particularly revealing. We were in a very competitive industry, semiconductors, and for a long time we were in the memory chip business, DRAMs and static RAMs, which are commodity devices. Customers can buy the same chip from multiple vendors and replace one vendor with another almost overnight without changing their system at all. It's like a new battery or a new thumb drive.
Just plug and play.
Exactly. And so there really wasn't much differentiation in this business. And so there was a lot of price pressure. That led to pressure on salespeople and even executive management to cross the ethical line, in fact, the legal line that prohibits price fixing.
Okay.
And there were cases in the semiconductor industry where prices for memory chips were falling very rapidly, and there was pressure, either externally or internally generated pressure, to try to slow down those declines in prices. Wow. And there were cases of salespeople and even executives collaborating with competitors to try to slow down the price declines. And that's illegal. And fortunately, in my case, even after being the subject of a Department of Justice antitrust investigation into price fixing, I was unaffected by that investigation. In other words, there was no evidence of any illegal behavior or unethical behavior. But I can tell you that there was pressure to do things that I'm glad I didn't do.
Right.
And if I had done those things, I would have been probably prosecuted for them and incarcerated, but also the reputation of the whole company would have been affected by that.
So that leads into a question I have. So I'm thinking about, younger leaders out there, emerging leaders who they may not have much experience with decision making around options that go on either side of the ethical boundaries, so to speak, or having to make decisions that may result in an unethical outcome. How do these young leaders and emerging leaders practice, so to speak, to make sure that they're ready when those come down the pike?
Good question again. And I would say first and foremost, make integrity your North Star. Do not compromise in the area of integrity. You can always get a new job, but you cannot get a new reputation.
Oh, I like
now,
that.
in terms of how do you train people in the area of ethics, how do leaders develop themselves in this area? With that North Star of integrity, it's a process of regular introspection and reflection on how you're doing against it, complemented by 360 feedback from people above, below, and around you on how they perceive your integrity. And in some cases, coaching can help address these needs for improvement.
Leadership coaching.
Exactly.
Sure. I think it's important what you mentioned about the North Star, because you're making a decision to make that important when you're not faced with the decision at the moment, so that in the future, when those come out, you're ready to say, okay, this is already my North Star. This is how I'm going to operate. Instead of trying to decide that in the heat of the moment, you've already decided that.
You make your most important decisions when you're not under duress.
Wow, that's a that's a lot to take in, and it's powerful stuff. Let's dive into the ethics case that you have, Dan. This is exciting, and I'm excited to hear the story that you have for us.
You bet. It's a remarkable story that consumed almost completely a year of my life, so I'll try to compress it into about 10 minutes.
We're
But
excited to hear.
the starting point is that my company, Renaissance Electronics, was the world's #1 microcontroller supplier. Microcontrollers are semiconductor devices that are not commodities. They're not like memory chips, which you can plug in and replace overnight.
Okay.
The whole system that uses it is architected around that microcontroller architecture, including its software.
I see.
So if one company can't supply a microcontroller to its customer, that customer has to redesign the system. They can't just go buy it from somebody else. So it's a proprietary solution. We were the #1 supplier of this specific type of chip in the world, and we were the leading supplier in the world to the automotive marketplace.
Okay.
And the automotive marketplace it's an extremely large and important semiconductor application segment. And for the lack of a $5 or $10 microcontroller, an $80,000 car could become unshippable to its customer. So it's incredibly leveraged against the value of the end product. And what happened was in 2011, in March of 2011, the great East Japan earthquake occurred, and the tsunami, which knocked out that nuclear power plant, occurred. Almost 20,000 people lost their lives in that disaster, and it knocked our largest and most important factory offline. And roughly half of our capacity for these proprietary microcontrollers was lost. Customers throughout the world immediately recognized the threat to their business. They immediately understood that if we couldn't ship product to them, they couldn't ship their end product.
Right.
And so they started lining up and coming in to my office, ultimately going to the headquarters in Japan, insisting that they get fully supported before other customers were supported, or else they wouldn't deal with us again. And the company was under an enormous amount of pressure to support traditional customers, customers that were the largest today, at the expense of smaller customers who we had been working for years to develop new relationships with and new business with. And we knew that we couldn't satisfy everybody. And so a very fundamental ethical decision had to be made. How are we going to allocate our reduced output
Right.
until the capacity comes back online? And as I said, there was enormous pressure from many quarters to focus on certain set of customers and cut off others. I was one member of the global management team that made the decision to support every customer at the same level or the same percentage of our capacity that they were getting before the earthquake. So small customers and large customers alike got the same percentage of our capacity, even though it was reduced,
Right.
that they were previously getting. We implemented that plan. We were transparent. We offered everybody the opportunity to come in and see our recovery progress, to see the numbers, to verify that they were being treated fairly the way that we said that they would be treated. And we answered all their questions openly and transparently and let them verify the information themselves. So trust was established. And even where they were disappointed in the outcome, they trusted us and they believed us completely.
Right.
Well, in addition to that, our employees were concerned about their future, their job security because of this threat to the company. We treated them the same way. Honesty, transparency, regular communications on the recovery status. We didn't sugarcoat it. We didn't say it's not a crisis. We didn't say there's no risk to your position.
Right.
All we said was, here's the situation, here's what we're doing about it. And we were consistently open and honest with the employees, just like we were with the customers. And from that foundation, James, another development took place in Japan, which was, I would call it a Manhattan Project-like national effort to get the factory restored. And so the government, the whole semiconductor industry, even competitors offered to help. Really? Because competitors couldn't ship to these same customers if we weren't shipping to them.
Okay.
And in the end, a recovery process that was thought it might take a year took about 4 months.
Wow.
And other things developed out of that experience, including the best in the world disaster recovery plans for the future and alternate sources, alternate manufacturing sources for all of our products.
Gotcha.
And that became a standard that our customers were so impressed with. They asked us to share that with other competitors, and we did so.
Right.
And just because they helped us recover,
Then
we shared lessons learned with them.
Mm-hmm.
And from a point of thinking that the company might literally go out of business within a year, we ended up with stronger customer relationships and more trust on the part of customers and employees than we started with.
Wow.
And it's because of honesty and integrity, not covering anything up, not deceiving anybody, and treating everybody fairly. And to me, that's a good example of the ethical approach being the right business solution.
Absolutely. That's an unreal story. You mentioned transparency in there,
Mm-hmm.
and that sticks with me. What does that do for employees when they feel the transparency from their leaders?
If it's a difficult situation like we faced, they still may be afraid of the future.
Mm-hmm.
But if they see transparency, they trust the management more than they otherwise would. It motivates them to do their best to help solve the problems, and it motivates them to stay as long as they possibly can to try to help overcome the crisis before deciding that they need to do something else.
Gotcha. And then I'm curious, what happened with so your largest buyer? What was I guess their initial reaction may have been different than their long-term reaction. What was that like?
Very different. Our largest customers were the ones who initially insisted upon full support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they had a strong case to make. They had billions of dollars of end products that were affected by the supply of our chips.
Right.
And they were talking about their customers and their employees and their supply chain, and it was all true. These were valid concerns.
Absolutely.
But they also understood that this wasn't our fault. This was an earthquake and a tsunami.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a force majeure event in contract language.
Right.
An act of God, so to speak. And they didn't actually blame us for the problem. And the way that they saw us recover from it actually increased their confidence in us and their trust in us as a supplier.
So what do you think would have happened if you would have placed all of your resources to helping your biggest customer in the beginning?
I think that other customers who we didn't treat fairly would have permanently disengaged in their relationship with us if they survived.
Right.
And even if they didn't survive, their employees would have gone to other customers who would have hated us. The big customers that we supported might have temporarily expressed satisfaction, but they would also recognize that we didn't deal with everybody else fairly.
Right.
And they would wonder, when would that happen to them?
Sure. Another customer comes in that's larger than them, and
Exactly.
then they get squeezed out.
Trust became the foundation of all of our customer relationships. And a true existential crisis actually ended up strengthening the company.
Wow. That's impressive. I like the real life story that drives the point home. I'm going to have to listen to this 3 or 4 times to take it all in.
It wasn't easy. I don't want to make it sound easy. There were very, very dark days in that period of time.
Right. I can only imagine. So I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about our region here in the Spokane area. And so far during your time here, what do you think is unique about our leadership community, both public and private?
Well, as you mentioned, I've only been here a few years now, 3.5, but I've been extremely impressed with what I consider to be the civic pride and the sense of community that I see in Spokane. It's hard to even think of another city or region this size that could pull off something like Bloomsday or something like Hoop Fest.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is a unique community in that sense, and there's a lot of mutual support amongst entities, and it seems to me just a lot of pride in who we are. That's what stands out to me.
Definitely.
In my initial impression of the community.
The community rallies and helps each other. And
exactly, and they're proud to be who they are.
Definitely. And then what can Spokane's leaders, political or private or what have you, what can they do better maybe to increase leadership acumen?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that from what I see of the community leadership, it's generally very positive and very constructive.
Right.
It doesn't seem to me to reflect the kind of divisions that exist at higher levels of government, and I like that. The only observation I have for improvement at this point is for some kind of mechanism to exist or to be developed that allows all the different resources in the community and all the sources of support in the community for businesses, new and existing businesses, to be brought together under one roof or one platform so that businesses can see all that's out there to help them.
Okay. Instead of trying to run around and grab the various pieces for themselves.
And I think that there are excellent organizations that try to do that. GSI is a good example of that. And so I'm not saying that it isn't being done, but I'm simply saying that I think the more the community can connect the dots for its businesses and kind of create one-stop shopping, if you will, to solve business problems or issues related to growing a business.
Right, agreed.
Then I think that would be very healthy for the community.
Definitely. So we also, I've observed, we have a lot of emerging leaders in this community. What can emerging leaders do to continue to develop their leadership skills and hone that in?
Well, I always like to say practice makes perfect. Don't turn down opportunities to grow in your career, and don't be afraid to stretch yourself and take some risk, maybe even sometimes biting off more than you can chew, because you typically won't get those opportunities unless management thinks that you can grow into them,
right?
And unless they're willing to help you. But the most important principle that I would urge people to keep in mind, especially younger people developing in their careers, is to always think in terms of their team, the members of their organization, and the mission that group of people has, rather than thinking about their own interests. If they think about the mission and the people and put them first, they will be brought along in the success of the organization. And I think that it's important to be the kind of leader, to try to become the kind of leader where the organization is limited not by what you know, but by what everybody collectively knows.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's critical. Wow. Well, Dan, thanks for sharing all your insights and your time this morning to be on the Lilac City Leadership Podcast. It's been tremendous to hear your thoughts and your insights on leadership. So thanks so much.
The pleasure's all mine. Thank you, James.